Today's guest is Scott Ferguson from Engage PEO. Scott's vice president over there at Engage, many years of PEO experience. You know, we talk a lot, we ping pong back and forth different PEO ideas and industry and what's happening and everything in between. So really, Scott, thank you for joining. I want to just open it up to you if you want to just say a few intro words, and then we can get the ball rolling.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Guillermo, for this opportunity. Either as a property and casualty broker working with PEOs and putting their risk management programs together, to actually working with PEOs and finding out the best solutions for clients that benefit from the services that they provide. As you mentioned, I'm with Engage and vice president of sales there, and I love seeing the success that PEOs actually bring.
So you've been on both sides, right? So kind of.
I have been on both sides, yeah. So I see all sides of it, and I've seen cases in which clients start with a PEO, and because of the PEO, they've been able to grow and become really profitable. And then, to be honest with you, eventually graduate from a PEO because they're in the hundreds and hundreds of employees. So
yeah. So I guess this is a really good segue. So when you say when a client starts with a PEO, like what does that mean? Do they have to have a certain number of employees, or what's kind of the threshold, right? Because we get a lot of clients that this is one of their main questions, like, hey, am I eligible or am I a fit for a PEO? Am I too small? Am I too big? Like they're looking for this answer. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a really good question. Startups, I see quite a bit of just before, especially in technology, before they get their private equity funding, they come to a PEO where they want to work with a PEO to set up their foundation, basically from an HR, employment law, multi-state approach. So a PEO is really, really good for smaller companies and even startups. And there are PEOs that specialize in that as well, which are very, very, very useful. Typically, though, many of the clients I have seen have at least about 10 employees or 15 employees, and they're looking to grow, and they know that in order to grow, they need to set up their foundation, basically, from an HR point of view, and really go ahead and try to recruit the best talent and retain the people they have.
Yeah.
And that's also what a PEO does. They will provide that type of service. And they will provide actually usually fantastic employee benefits because they'll have a master medical plan that they can offer these small employers that are not eligible for it.
So I know a common question I'll ask you, this master medical plan that you're mentioning, is how do you get access to that? Is it only through a PEO? Like real quick, let's just kind of explain that a little bit to our audience.
Yeah, definitely. It's typically through a PEO. Many times the PEOs will have a master medical plan that is basically based on a number, basically all their clients. And with that size, they can offer a large group benefit program like you see with very, very large employers that they can't access because they're too small. Instead of going to open market, they can actually access a benefit plan, get the reduced rates, get the reduced out-of-pocket costs and deductibles, and really it will make a difference in terms of the coverage and services that they need.
Yeah, it makes sense. So it sounds like this is a scalability solution, right, for the mid-sized business, right? Because from what we understand is, when you join a PEO, now, at least strictly from an insurance perspective, right? When you join a PEO, now that insurance carrier, whoever it may be, Aetna, United, Blue Cross, one of the big guys, right? Or even some of the regional players. They look at that group now, part of that PEO master plan, instead of that 10 to 15 employee startup that you mentioned, up to that, thousands or hundreds of thousands of employees under that master policy. That's where that scale comes in. So that answers some questions out there. So you mentioned growth, right? And you mentioned you made a lot of points on the growth and joining the PEO with the. So what we want to know is probably the number one question we get a lot is a PEO worth it for my business, right? So when we hear that, we hear ROI versus cost. That's really what that business owner, that HR manager, CFO, that's what they're asking. Like, hey, is the ROI worth the cost? Because I've heard or I've seen, or maybe I have a current PEO that, is expensive, right? That's subjective, but, is expensive in their eyes, right? So, when a business owner that perhaps is looking at PEO for the first time, and then, they go through a PEO quote and they see, a 5 to 6 figure price point, they start to think to themselves, hey, is this really worth it? So if you could just kind of,
Sure.
what are the main ROI buckets, right? That, that business owner or that CFO should consider, right? Hard costs, soft costs, like what does that look like and what should they consider?
Well, first, let's talk about the hard costs. The hard costs, my first thought that comes to my mind is the medical, because that's where we see substantial savings in what we can offer them versus open market. And it's not just in premium. We're talking about coverage, deductible, and out-of-pocket expenses that really, really make a big difference. Now, in terms of the soft costs, that completely correlates to the fact that you can then retain key employees. You can then also recruit better employees because you're offering a better benefit plan. And that is really, really a key. The other soft cost I want to mention is that the human resource services that is provided. I know with Engage, we're the only one that provides employment law attorneys to our clients. So that really helps mitigate any sort of employment practice liability insurance claims or possible litigation, especially also when they're multi-state and they need to be in compliance, because fines will happen depending upon the state that you're in. California is very different than Florida, which is different than Texas, which is different than Massachusetts. So it's very, very important that you work with someone to prevent those costs. And my thing is really the whole process of where's the company want to go the next 3 years or 5 years. And a PEO many times is the best match for them if they are looking for growth and expansion and health insurance, for their employees. It really, really is a key, and it makes a difference. So in terms of the ROI, it definitely is there.
Would you argue, would you say that, if there's a company out there that's going through, medical renewal, or perhaps they're looking for different options, maybe they're working with a broker, right? Maybe their broker, it's a really good broker and they've brought multiple options, and hopefully that good broker is also showing them a PEO option, a mix, right? Because that's really how you can cover all your bases. Now, so let me ask you this, is there like a certain company profile where a PEO definitely makes financial sense? Like, is there specific company demographic, like as far as like industry or size, where it's like, hey, this is a no-brainer, like we got to look at a PEO, we got to consider one? Is there something like that exists?
It's a very broad industry base, because health insurance is health insurance for everyone. Recruitment, retainment, it's the same thing. There are certain industries that I think benefit more, such as in the hospitality industry, sometimes for long-term care or, things of that nature, where we do quite a bit of construction as well, depending upon the risk. Manufacturing, especially in technology, though, we see a lot of companies, smaller companies in technology, that benefit from a PEO because it allows them to actually recruit high level quality individuals, because they can offer much better benefit programs.
Right, of course.
And so we see that quite a bit in technology, along with manufacturing as well. So it's not really, I would say, industry specific, because it's pretty much everyone faces it, but there are certain industries I think that benefit a little bit more, especially when it comes to restaurants and hospitality, and of course in technology and manufacturing.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that and we've also heard that a lot of different business owners, once they get through through the presentation and talking with the sales team over at the PEO, they're worried about potential hidden pain points that may not show up during the sales pitch, right? So, like, what are some of the honest trade-offs or common complaints, right? You hear in the market, not necessarily, but just in general, because you speak to a lot of business owners, right, that are considering PEO. So, like, what are you hearing out there, and like, what are some of the issues that may pop up or that you've heard, kind of being their sounding board?
Oh my gosh. The first thing comes to my mind right away is your fee and what hidden fees that there are there. Because some PEOs will charge for everything, whereas others just do a flat out per employee per month, or we're going to charge you just per check per employee. What are the hidden fees? Those are the things that I am asked about right away. And the transparency is huge there, because also it helps, when I'm dealing with business owners and CFOs, it helps them determine what their budget is going forward. And the administration costs normally completely offset, the benefit savings. There's more of a benefit savings. But again, when we talk about the soft costs and the litigation prevention, it really, really makes a difference. But the thing that really pops in my head, what you said right there, that they always ask me is, well, what are your costs? And I think it's very, very important that you just always be transparent with them and tell them what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we kind of live in a day and age where, everyone's looking at the bottom line number with a microphone, with a magnifying glass. And, it's important, right? Because PEO takes on a lot of the liability, not all the liability, but it becomes a significant cog in that company's workforce and workforce model. Want to make sure that it functions correctly, right? And the PEO is keeping its promise, right? From Izzy. So, I think from what I'm hearing is the goal is to definitely build trust through transparency and advice, right? Because we both know that you cannot force fit a client into a PEO. Either it's going to be a fit or it's not, right?
And there's so many different, and there are so many different PEOs out there.
Yeah.
And the PEO broker, you can really identify what's going to be the best fit for that client. Do they want something just transactional, or do they want something with a very strong human capital management approach? Right. And that really, really, really is the key.
Yeah. We've definitely seen both, and definitely different messaging, different ideology from that business owner's point of view on how they see the workforce. Like you said, either transactional, hey, get it done, or something a little bit more strategic, something that they really want to invest in because they understand the long-term potential result. Awesome. So we want to know. So we actually hear stories where PEO clients feel like just another ticket number.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Issues with support, tech issues, maybe lack of strong platform integration. So how do you keep service personal and responsive, and how does Engage really differentiate in their service model?
Well, that's the big thing about Engage. Yes, like in Massachusetts, we're the only PEO in the state that has Blue Cross Blue Shield. Throughout the rest of the country, it's with Aetna. In certain parts of California, maybe UHC or Kaiser. But the big, big differentiator with us is our human capital management, human resource approach. We do offer, employment law attorneys to all of our clients, and they're very involved. And these attorneys are spread all throughout the country. So it really makes a big difference if they are multi-state, because we can help them in that compliance issue, not just from compliance, but also from a legal point of view, in helping them prevent litigation. Engage is also very, 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 very transparent when it comes to pricing. We put everything out there, and there really is no hidden fees. This is it. And we let them know, and no one's being nickel and dime. That's not how we roll, and Engage doesn't. That's not the culture of Engage.
So when you say responsive, right? Is it what level responsiveness, right? So like if I pick up the phone, am I able to call someone directly, that's going to answer my question, or is it a ticket queue, or a combination, or how do you guys handle?
Yeah, that's such a great question because, with the really, really large PEOs, they may use chatbots and all of that, and you just have to call someone and yada, yada, yada. With us, the employer the employer has the direct line to someone and their email, and they call them, especially also the employment law attorney. I mean, they will call them. And that's really, really key because we then learn what the culture of that company is and how we can best help that company. Typically, the turnaround time, if they don't answer, it's within maybe 4 or 5 hours that they'll get back to you one way or another. Employees, there is an employee line that most employees call just because they need to update their password or something very, very basic in terms of that. Whereas, we are not a company that is just 800 by see ya. It's very, very, very hands-on, and we learn the culture of that company and how we can help them grow. And that's why we pretty much have the highest retention in the industry because, clients don't really leave us. It's very strong.
Yeah. I want to point out something you just said, retention versus net promoter score, right?
Yes.
That's very different because net promoter score is usually gathered at point of sale or very close to point of sale, right? It's kind of like a survey, right? And of course, most PEOs do a good job for the most part in the implementation and the onboarding, especially if they have a good team. If that client has a good team from sales to operations and implementation, they're going to get a high net promoter score. But I think a stronger indicator of how a PEO is really servicing its clients is a retention rate, right? Because that means that PEO is doing something right for the client to stay around as long as they are. You would argue. So I would probably, recommend that to anybody watching this video is, hey, yeah, NPS is good as kind of a surface indicator, but you really want to know the retention rate. How long are these clients staying with that PEO? Because that tells you a lot about, the what's under the hood and the servicing and all that. Handle their situations. Okay, cool. So I kind of want to shift gears here real quick. Sometimes we get clients that are a little on the fence and a little skittish when it comes to PEO because they heard of this word called co-employment. Right? Co-employment sounds like a big, legal term, right? Oh, co-employment, what is that? I'm not really sure. Let me call my attorney, right? We want to, in your own words, right? If you can just kind of demystify co-employment, pros and the cons, and what it really is, so that business owner or the CFO, whoever watching, can really understand what this means in the PEO world.
With the PEOs that I've worked with over the years as a broker, and then now actually on the PEO side, the co-employment really is because we're doing their payroll, where they're using our FEIN number because we can provide them workers' compensation, but also the employee benefits. And with the co-employment, we're also assuming a lot of the legal liability for the taxes and things of that nature, which is a benefit. That's really it. We do not tell them how to run their company. We do not tell them who to hire and who to fire. We will give them advice, legal advice, as for if they want to terminate someone and how's the best way to do that, and what are the steps you need to do that. But when it comes to co-employment, we are not telling the employer, the client, how to run their business. Nothing like that. A lot of it really just dovetails into the fact that we're doing their payroll. And it's under our FEIN number, and then they're on our benefits and our workers' comp. That's really, really, really where it stems from. Many times people will ask me, goes, well, co-employments are your employees too, and you can hire them and fire them. No.
I guess from what I'm hearing, some of the liabilities that when a client enters into a PEO relationship, those liabilities are a shift away from responsibility on payroll and payroll tax filing, right? Because that's a huge one right there, right? No employees want errors in their payroll or their paycheck. right? Because then that just,
If they're multi-state,
yeah,
because certain cities will have additional taxes, and it's really, really, really important that you have someone that specializes in that. But also in terms of the employment liability piece of it too, with the co-employment piece, we want to give them the correct counsel and advice that if they need to let someone go, what's the best way to do this? And it all dovetails back into what's your company culture.
Are there certain states, or are there certain, I guess, areas in the country where, there's more, I guess, legal activity when it comes to, employers being sued by their employees for whatever reason? I guess what I'm trying to ask is, since you guys offer, that employment attorney on staff, like where the most of the cases, or
Right.
most of the claims come from? Is there a certain part of the country that you see a lot of that going on, or is it kind of spread out?
I don't necessarily look at the pure numbers as I look at the population of the state, the number of businesses, and the number of claims that come from that state. So I see it somewhat spread out. Everyone knows California typically is the leader, and they were leader in a lot of things, maybe isn't good. In being a San Diegan, I know that. So, but it's across the country, and it really varies. And in states where they have very strong economic presence, whether it be Boston or Miami or Dallas or Los Angeles, San Diego, you're going to come across that. Versus other states that don't really have that much of an industry per se.
A little bit more settled than some of the other ones. Now, you said industry. Is there more industries that you see more of these claims arise? Is it specific to industry, or just kind of across the board?
Well, I know, again, in hospitality, I have seen more of that because of part-time and full-time and some of the conflicts that come around that. As for other industries, it really, really just depends. My first thought, though, is more of the blue collar or gray collar, I should say, that I see more of in my past as a broker. Yeah. Not so much in technology and the high tech firms.
Right.
The other way.
Because it has to do more with like the actual employee population demographic that are within that industry that business is kind of dealing with and working with on a day-to-day basis. Makes sense. Something else that we hear a lot, maybe not as often as some of the other ones that we mentioned earlier, but we hear more and more concerns around data privacy, right? Data privacy that has to do with, the company's own data, right? Because as a PEO, you're dealing with sensitive data, right? Payroll data, social security numbers, HIPAA compliance, right? And each state is different, could have different, varying laws and all that. That's why a lot of times we hear business owners kind of hesitate to hand over, employee names, ages, salaries, just to get a quote. How do you kind of take the edge off that, and how does Engage kind of handle that securely?
The first thing that comes to my mind is, what type of system are you using? IT system, and what sort of privacy is built in? Is it the prison system, which is kind of like the standard bearer of the PEO industry, or is it an in-house system? It really, really depends. But that is a very, very, very big issue for a lot of employers, because they're like, I'm not sure, I don't really know you, and I'm not sure I want that information to get out.
Have you ever come across that, where you're engaging with a business and they like what you're saying, and then now, hey, I need this information to get you accurate pricing, and they kind of hesitate, like, wait, whoa, why do you need all this? Like, how do you overcome that?
Well, first and foremost, everything will be sent via encrypted email, so it's not going to be violated per se. As for the company, it really comes down to, do you trust this PEO or not, and what's that PEO's reputation? If you need to have a meeting with someone in your security or IT team to discuss with them, hey, this is how we're going to be protecting your information that you're going to be sending over to us, that's something that can be done. But I always, I hear this quite a bit, and I'm always like, well, this is the system that's being used, and you're going to send things to us via encrypted so we can make sure that's not going to be hacked. With Engage, it's, our reputation, but also our credentials, whether it's, through ESAC or, the IRS, all of those credentials, verifies who we are,
Right.
and makes a difference.
Yeah. So for those that are watching, that are not familiar with what you just said, so you want to expand on a little bit about what you just said about the CPEO, right? That you were alluding to as the IRS, and ESAC, right? So why don't you just give us like the quick cliff notes of what that is and why that's important, right?
Oh, it's huge.
For
The
PEO.
thing is because it shows the credibility of the PEO that financially it's a secure company. ESAC, think of FDIC for banks. That's what I kind of correlate ESAC to. And, there's a cost.
So like FDIC kind of correlate to
Yeah, when you
ESAC.
think of the FDIC with banks, some of the ESAC with PEOs. CPEO, it's also a very lengthy process and expensive,
Right.
but again, it verifies, it substantiates who you are.
And that's for the IRS, right? Yeah. We've seen a lot of well, not a lot, because to get CPEO designation, it's like you were saying, it's pretty difficult, right? You got to go. The IRS runs that program, and they look at every single. They turn over every stone, basically, for a PEO that wants to get CPEO, and that's just another confidence check mark for the client for that CPEO designation, and that just reaffirms everyone that, hey, the IRS says that this PEO is financially stable. They've met some of the auditing requirements that gain that CPEO designation. So I hope that kind of clears things up for everybody in the audience what that exactly is. And there's actually a publication. This is public information on the IRS website. If someone just Googles CPEO IRS, that list of CPEOs is available to the public and engages on it. So good for you guys.
And I understand why some clients are concerned, because in the early days, we didn't have these types of accreditations when PEOs kind of first got started, and some people had bad experiences. The industry's completely changed, though. It is completely different. And that's why I believe in it also so strong, because I've seen it work, and it financially is a stable solution.
Absolutely. So would you recommend a client when they're searching for a PEO to look at CPEOs kind of as the top of their list, or kind of how should they kind of go about it? Now, speaking from both the insurance broker perspective, that you live that side, and now on this other side, like how should they go about?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Going through the process.
My first question to them is, what if they're looking at a PEO? What's the history of the PEO? How long have they been in business? What are their accreditations? I'm always concerned financially, make sure they're solvent and they're going to be paying your quarterly taxes, and to do that research in regards to that. Now, a lot of the smaller PEOs out there, they're fantastic. They can do a lot of local hand holding. And then you've got some of the really, really larger national ones, which, may have all those accreditations, but they may not be able to provide that type of intense hand-holding type service like Engage does. But I always tell people, if they're looking at a PEO, to do their research on that PEO to make sure that it's financially sound. And never mind the services they're going to provide. I think from a P&L point of view, a lot of times, to make sure it's financially strong, and they're going to go ahead and do what they say they're going to do. So yeah, definitely CPEO and the accreditations, whether it's ESAC or whatever, it's extremely important. And
it's crazy, because a lot of clients that we speak to don't even know that these accreditations even exist, let alone what they mean. Right. So they kind of just, let's just be honest here. Most clients go to, some of the PEOs that are well known, maybe have better marketing, right? It doesn't necessarily make them the best fit for that specific business, right?
Mhm.
It's kind of like a matchmaking, right? You got to make sure that all the boxes, or at least all the major boxes, are checked.
Correct.
So
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what about businesses, right, that have employees in multiple states? I know you touched on this earlier, but ever since COVID, right,
hmm
remote hiring and remote workforce has gone, and we don't really see that going away, right? Most employees, they want to work remote, right? They like working remote. That's where we see a lot of smaller companies winning top talent employees. They offer this perk, right? And then some employers offer a hybrid approach, right? So like how well does Engage handle kind of the patchwork of state law,